Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, episode 263, Widowhood and the Seven Deadly Sins, an interview with Elise Loehnen.
Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, the only podcast that offers a proven process to help you work through your grief, to grow, evolve, and create a future you can truly look forward to. Here's your host, Master Certified Life Coach, Grief Expert, Widow, and Mom, Krista St-Germain.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the podcast. If you have ever wondered why you are so bothered by the idea of feeling angry or envious, if you have struggled to untangle your worth from how much you get done, if you've had a hard time making peace with money or figuring out what you want in this new chapter of life, this episode is one you don't want to miss. I just finished this interview with Elise, and as per usual, I do the interview first and then I record the intro later, and it did not disappoint. I loved Elise's book, and the conversation was even better. So I will let her introduce herself, but suffice it to say, she is the author of a book called On Our Best Behavior, The Seven Deadly Sins and the Price That Women Pay to Be Good. I listened to it on Audible last summer, and it just made so many things make sense about how we are socialized as women. And it's actually not at all religious, if that's what you're thinking. But it does make a lot of behavior make sense, and I think you're going to love Elise. She has also co-written 12 books, including 5 New York Times bestsellers. She was the chief content officer of Goop, and she also co-hosted the Goop podcast and the Goop Lab on Netflix. You may have seen her in that show or heard her on that podcast. She also has her own podcast called Pulling the Thread, which I am currently binging. Until preparing for this interview, I didn't know her podcast existed. And now that I'm listening, she has done some absolutely fascinating, thoughtful, eye-opening interviews. And I'm excited to learn more from her. So I hope you get a lot out of this podcast. I hope a lot of your behaviors make sense. And without further ado, we'll jump in. Elise, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited that you're here. I will say, before we jump in, I'm very picky. It's picky, but it's also like this protectiveness that I feel over my listeners. And so you've been on my list of somebody that I've wanted to have a conversation with and have on the podcast and share with them for a long time. So thank you for coming.
I appreciate that. And I similarly, I try to be really careful and not flippant, because you're asking a lot of someone, right? To engage with you for however long.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So instead of me introducing you, I would love it if you introduced yourself to listeners so you can tell them anything you want.
Anything I want. I'm a Sag. Just kidding. My name's Elise. I grew up in Montana, which is always interesting to people. And I ultimately became a magazine editor, and then I was the chief content officer at Goop for a long time, where I co-hosted that podcast and I did that TV show, and then I left in 2020 and have been doing my own thing. I wrote a book that came out last year called On Our Best Behavior, The Seven Deadly Sins and the Price Women Pay to Be Good, which was a New York Times bestseller, which was incredibly exciting. And I host a podcast where similarly, I try to, deliver the conversations that I think help people better understand this moment that we find ourselves in today, and to get a little bit closer to themselves through the process. And I'm a mom. I have 2 young boys. I have an almost 8-year-old and 11-year-old. I live in Los Angeles now, and I'm married to a great guy. And I have an older brother who I write about in the book in the context of grief, whose husband died 7 years ago. Actually, weirdly, it's the 7-year anniversary of his death
Today?
And yeah.
Oh, wow.
Interesting. Yeah. And this always ends up happening for me. Like, I flew to San Francisco where he died not even realizing it. And it was a year after he died, to interview Lucy Koloniki, Kalanithi, whose husband
Yeah.
wrote When Breath Becomes Air. And of
Mm-hmm.
course I would be having this conversation 1 year after. So here I am with you. But yeah, Peter died when he was 39, and he was my best friend. I met him. They met their first week of college, and I was in high school. I was 16, and he was really my primary brother for 2 decades. So anyway, I think about him and miss him all the time. And his death has, not that he didn't already have a big impact on my life, but his death has, I'd say, impacted my life even more than if he were here. Big part of what I do and where I am is due to Peter's influence from the other side.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I said I'm picky. Lucy's also one of the guests that I like picky and had. So I actually audibled your book before I had figured out you wrote it. Like I knew who you were from Goop and from the podcast, and I think it must have been just the title that probably appealed to me, but I audibled it first and then connected the dots. And then also only recently did I realize you have an amazing podcast. And I know that's probably not the huge focus, but yeah, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes, because I think it will be what I binge for quite a while until I get through it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's called Pulling the Thread. And I feel like, I don't know, you might feel the same, but podcasting is, it's one of my primary loves. I love it. It is such an honor and privilege to sit with people and be in people's ears and have that intimate, that resonance of audio. So thank you. I'm really proud of my show, and it's very simple, similar to yours, like lightly edited conversations. And
I don't know that simple is the word I would use to describe your podcast, if we're being obvious. I mean, maybe like not highly edited, but rather deep. So maybe not simple.
Well, thank you. I try to get in there and go for it on things that I think we all really care about, and that often I think people can feel isolated in their own communities from these conversations. I mean, you know better than anyone, working with people who are isolated by an experience that we all dreadfully really don't want.
Yeah, for sure. What made you, because I have all these questions for you about the book. We'll do the book today, and then I'll do a whole bunch of binging, and then I'll learn all the more stuff, and I'll have all the questions that I wish I had known enough to ask you, and then we'll do a round 2. But so for today, can you talk to me first about, like, why did you write this book? What drew you to this subject? Talk about that for starters.
Yeah. And also for people who heard 7 Deadly Sins and think that it's about religion, it's really a secular book. I was raised in a secular household. My father's Jewish. My mom would call herself a recovering Catholic. But although I've become, really since Peter died, like a deeply spiritual person. But I wanted to write the book because I wanted to understand more about what I observed of my own psychology as a woman who grew up, I should add, in like a very progressive house in a more conservative state, but in a progressive community. And so I didn't really get this programming overtly, right? Like I wasn't preached to or punished, etc. And yet as a woman, despite all of this, I still felt myself on some sort of treadmill. Even at the book starts in really in probably 2020, at the height of my career. I had just turned 40. I was on a TV show, like the co-host of this hit podcast, big flashy job, 2 kids, etc. All the things. I'd done all the things, and yet I was still chased by feelings of not being good enough, not thin enough, not financially secure enough, not smart enough, not all of the things. And the book opens with me. I have a chronic hyperventilation disorder where I feel like I can't take a deep breath. So when I get into it for months, I'm yawning and sighing and sort of gasping and just feeling like I can't live like this anymore. And there's clearly no finish line. That's an illusion. There is no moment when I'm going to feel like I'm good and I'm safe and I'm free of fear. And so that was sort of one of the primary reasons, and recognizing that all these voices in my head were shared and weren't coming from any specific person. It wasn't coming from my parents. It wasn't coming from my husband. It wasn't coming from any person. It was just this floating conversation. And I'm like, all I want to do is unsubscribe to this. And yet I can't, because it is so insidious.
Yeah.
And those voices are shared. And then I also wanted to really understand on a collective level why women, how we've come so far and yet have not seemingly are going backwards in some instances, and why we couldn't, support Hillary, for example. Like, I really wanted to understand what that was about, because to me, that wasn't about policy. That was about our own undiagnosed behavior, our own undiagnosed envy and ambivalence. And so that was also one of the genesis, to be like, what's happening? Why do I struggle, if I'm being really honest, as much as I try to do for other women in the culture and celebrate authors and thinkers and whatnot, and men too. But why do I feel that hit of schadenfreude when something bad happens? To a really visible woman, why do I have that, like, oh, she deserves it, or who does she think she is, or what's that? Because to me, that's sort of if we're honest, if we could really begin to bring that up and look at it, I think that's one of the reasons that we really struggle to get on side with each other and feel terrible about that.
And so what pointed you, so I'm clear on what you were struggling with. What made you decide to take it in the direction of the idea of the 7 deadly sins?
7 deadly sins. Yeah. So it started with envy. To that point, I was like, I think that this is undiagnosed envy. And it was based on this conversation that I'd had with Lori Gottlieb, who wrote Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. And in it, she has this there's a small moment where she says, I tell my clients to pay attention to their envy because it shows them what they want. And in that moment, Krista, I had 2 revelations. One, I don't know what I want. As a woman, I think many of us are conditioned to subjugate anything that we might want to other people's needs. So we're not used to this language. In fact, I just led a retreat and we did this exercise about saying I want, and everyone was trying to temper it to like, I would like. I would like, but saying, I want this, I want that is very hard. And it feels unseemly. And then similarly, envy, you hear that word and you're like, ew, gross. I would never have that. I don't have that. I don't have that. I don't want anything to do with it. And I realized that actually, because it's so bad, feels so bad and gross, we repress and suppress it. And then we project it onto the people who are stoking our envy, right? And this is all an unconscious process. Nobody is doing this overtly. But what happens is when you find yourself reacting to a woman and you can't point to any behavior that's a problem, and you find yourself saying like, I just don't like her, or who does she think she is? Or I didn't think her book was very good, or I don't understand why people think she's a big deal, or she really like chafes my hide, or she's too big for her britches. Anything like that is a smoke signal that envy is present, because this woman is doing something or has something that you want for yourself. And she's a mirror, and it is your soul knocking and saying, pay attention to this. You want this. There's some information here, because you'll notice amongst your female friends, like the same people don't generally irritate you. It's usually pretty specific, and you can, if you let it happen and get present with it, it's full of information. And that was part of the process of writing this book, was recognizing like, oh, I want to write a book. Instead of, I've ghostwritten 12 books. I've been behind the scenes on so many brands, but it was this moment of like, why does she have a book? Why her? and instead of
You didn't even
saying,
know, you hadn't even
yeah,
acknowledged to yourself that you wanted to write a book until you started noticing the
no,
envy.
exactly. And then one of these women where I was like, I mean, what's that book? She said to me, she looked at me. I mean, this is again totally unprompted and said, why haven't you written a book? I was like, oh God, this is like getting even more meta. So I started with envy. And originally I was like, I think I should just write a book about envy. And my brother is a book editor. And he said, it's interesting. I don't know that people want to cultivate envy. Like, I don't know if that's is that a big enough book, a big enough concept? And so I was like, I love doing words and etymologies, and I do that a lot on my Instagram. And so I was like, what is envy, and where did it come from, and what is it related to? And I was on a plane, and in midair, I was like, oh, it's one of those sins. What are those? I've seen the movie Seven, and I pulled them up, and to remind people what they are: sloth, envy, pride, greed, gluttony, lust, anger. And there's actually an eighth, which we can talk about as well, because it's particularly relevant for this audience. But that hit me. I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is the punch card of what it is to be a good woman. And nobody, like my husband, is not internalizing these as a punch card. This is me, and this is my friends, and this is all the women I know moralizing about food. I was bad today, I'll be good tomorrow. Sex, like, how do I be desirable but not desiring? All of these are all we recognize. We hate angry women. So what do I do with all of my impatience, frustration, and rage, right? So I realized I was just, one of those moments where there's actually a word for this, like agnosis or something, where I was like, oh my God, this is so obvious and yet invisible. Like, holy shit. This is the map. Like this is the map.
Yeah, I think that's why I say I read it. I audibled it.
Yeah.
Audibled it, which is how I do most things.
I read it to you.
Yeah, you read it to me. I listened to you read it to me. Thank you for that. But that's why it resonated with me so much, not only because so much of what you talk about are things that I have struggled with, but I'm sure you're not going to be surprised by this at all. It's all the things my clients are struggling with, right? That you would think that we're going to be talking about grief, and we do.
Yeah.
But so much of what's in the way for the women that I work with of loving life again are these things, are these ways that we've been conditioned as women and don't even know. Because like you said, it doesn't have to be explicitly taught.
No. And so many of the ways that we are conditioned as well as women, and this is sort of heady, but is in relationship too, and preserving relationship, contributing, being in service to relationship, holding relationship. And so I think too, as a woman, when you lose your relationship, I can imagine that puts all of this into an entirely new context. Who am I?
Who am I? What, right?
Without
what do I want? If I can't have what I was taught to want because it was taken away, I don't even know what to want.
What I want. Exactly. And what is it okay to want?
Yeah.
And I think so many of us are put on this sort of auto course where we get this, again, similarly, like a punch card of like, these are the things that you do. That I had a failure of imagination after the age of 30. I had never really, I was like, I just know these are these like, hit these mile markers in life. And then I'm going to like kind of live for my kids and all these things, which are kind of true and kind of not, So, and yeah, and in the context of grief for this audience too, I think it's important. And I write about Peter in the book in this chapter and sort of that whole process as well. And watching my brother go through it, is that originally, so most people would think, oh, the 7 deadly sins, they're in the Bible. They're not in the Bible. They came out of the Egyptian desert in the 4th century. They were written down originally by this monk named Evagrius Ponticus, but all of these things are sort of like in the collective unconscious, and I'm sure that they have showed up in various forms elsewhere, but he wrote them down. And he's also credited as an early father of the Enneagram. In fact, the vices
I missed that part.
yeah, they're related to might have been a footnote. They're related to the Enneagram as well, which is fascinating and gives you a sense of sort of what they were originally intended to be, which is more like GPS points. Like, how do you, bring these human instincts out and like work with them as some sort of animating or guiding emotion or basic human instinct without making it about hell and damnation. So he wrote them down, and originally they were 8 thoughts, and the 8th was sadness. And then they traveled throughout the desert, and it wasn't until 590 that Pope Gregory I gave this homily where he turned them into these 7 cardinal vices. And in the New Testament, people who are big New Testament readers might remember that Mary Magdalene is the one who's referred to as the one from whom Jesus cast 7 demons. It's never specified exactly what he meant by that. And demon had there was a different energy to it at the time. It was more like a daemon, like this distraction, this not like not necessarily a devil, not in sort of the hellfire way that we think of it now. And so Pope Gregory made this big leap and said, those 7 demons are these 7 cardinal vices. They're the same. And Mary Magdalene is the same as the woman who anoints Jesus's feet with her hair. Different woman, but no bother. And
details.
They are a penitent prostitute. So that's the moment that Mary Magdalene became a penitent prostitute. And she wore that reputation, and the carrier of these sins. And she wore that reputation until I think like 1980, when I don't remember who was Pope, but said, oh, we kind of messed up and she wasn't a prostitute. I know she's been painted like that over time because Pope Gregory also lifted the edict on religious iconography from the Old Testament. So now you see all these paintings of like Mary Magdalene in red clutching at Jesus. And then recently Pope Francis made her the apostle to the apostles. She was really the first apostle also. And her gospel, which was cast out as heretical and then recently recovered in the last couple centuries, is beautiful. But yeah, that's how it happened.
What a surprising rabbit hole that must have been.
And it was so exciting. When you start a book like this and you just, again, it goes to the name of my podcast, it's like pulling the thread where you're on, it felt a little Dan Brown, like, I'm not gonna lie, but you're just like, oh my God, I didn't realize, I thought this was like a fun superstructure for a book. I didn't realize how deep this is. And that this is so meta in such a significant way. And so, but yeah, and sadness just, when Pope Gregory took those 8 thoughts, sadness went away. And I think it's because sadness is something we would codify as actually more of a feminine value. It's weak, it's not weak, but that's the way we would think of it culturally: passive, receptive, this thing that's happening to you. And so it just went bye-bye. And I resurrected it for the book and made the argument that I think that the way that men, since the book is 7 chapters about women and the psychology of women, it's the 8th chapter about sadness is what happens to boys and men in our culture and the way we sever them from their feelings, including their grief, their nurture, their tendency towards nurturance and care and creativity. Again, values we would quote unquote call feminine, but are very human. They belong to all of us.
Yeah. Even so, with women, I think we still have internalized some rules about to what extent we're allowed to feel sad, to what intensity, for how long.
Yes. And like the way that we carry it into culture, because that chapter is also about women, but like this, like, you would never cry at work, and like, don't ever let them see you down, and like, go find a stall, and it's not okay to be emotional. So, and obviously, and the chapter is also about how intolerant we are of death in our culture and hard feelings, and how we just want people to get over things as fast as possible so that we're not uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Which so explains how people treat us in grief, but also how we treat ourselves.
Yeah. 100%.
I remember just going through and listening and thinking, yep, I see this in coaching. I see this in coaching. How many times have I been asked, essentially, help me not cry? Like, help me get through this death anniversary, this time when I know I will be sad without visibly expressing my emotion. Help me do that.
Yeah.
Which in and of itself is just heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is deeply heartbreaking. And I think, I have a lot of what's one of the etymologies that I love the most is the etymology of care. Speaking of these feminine values, and it's the etymology of care is actually comes from grief or lament. And you think of that as just also so central to what it is to be a human, and our disavowal of it, our refusal to stay in it, I think has like cataclysmic impact, not only on us and our own ecosystem, but also on the planet and all of it. We just won't we refuse to look at sort of the second half of life, that it ends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody told us that.
I know. I don't know why this is always so surprising
you get the degree
to people.
and then you get married and then you have children and then happily ever after. Yeah. No.
Yeah. And we're just so sanitized from it. We try to just stay so far away from it. I think about it all the time. Like whenever I'm with someone, like whenever I travel or have traveled in less developed parts of the world and been with people who are just like, I'm not eating that chicken. And I'm like, oh, interesting. But like, you'll eat the styrofoam wrapped chicken. Like, you don't know that it's a chicken.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like even
yeah.
down to that, it's like, we're like, it's a steak. It's not a cow. That even contemplating that is difficult, I find, for most people.
One of the things that I saw so much of myself, but one of the things that I saw in myself when you talk about sloth was how much I badly wanted to, well, first of all, do it right, but then also do it quickly and do what I needed to do to get back to being productive.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you talk about that? Because I know it's not just me. I also see it in lots of other grievers too.
It's the first chapter in the book because I think it's so relatable to every woman who sees her function primarily as like a doer. And there's always more doing that needs to be done, right? And we just don't spend a lot of time thinking about like to do or to be. It's like, let's just do. In fact, I write about too, like this need for productivity has been, I'm trying to really work on it, has been sort of one of my primary ways to self-soothe and distract myself and keep me out of my feelings. And I write about things that I think we all relate to, like having not sat through like a single movie or maybe I'd watch an episode of TV with my partner before bed, maybe, but that even if I'm doing that, I have my computer out and I'm doing all the other doing in a way that he'd be like, can you just like not do that? Can we just like hang out? But I find that very difficult. And I used to be really mad at him. I wasn't conscious of this, but I had a lot of resentment toward my husband. We both work. I'm the primary breadwinner, but he works full-time too. And we have these 2 kids and he's a great parent, but of course I do more. And we have support as well. And I would find just like this, like, I'm doing so much, I do so much more than you, just this like unspoken rage and resentment. And then I had this moment in the process of writing this book where I was like, he's not asking you to do anything. And his expectations of how things need to be are much lower. You're the one who's cattle prodding yourself to like ensure that the house has like abides by a certain standard of like niceness or cleanliness. You're the one who is like insisting that to not make dinner is a crime, etc. Like I
Mhm.
was imposing it on myself and trying to meet a standard that I had established for myself based on cultural standards, of
Yeah.
course, and Instagram and ideas about what it is to be a good woman and a good mother and a good husband or a good wife. And yet, like, none of it was coming from outside of me. I was just policing myself to an internal
Mhm.
standard and dealing with my own anxiety. Like, well, if something like, did I give my kid, all the things that we
Yeah.
think that we can sort of soothe the way, but really, like, I can't control my kids or their future or their health, or I have some impact, but I can't engineer a
Right.
certain outcome.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
can you stop doing and just be and also feel safe?
Mm-mm. Not without the work that I've been doing and
Mhm.
really getting close to it and recognizing a lot of the stories that I tell myself about who it is. I just led a workshop on the book, and as part of the process, I did it with a friend who's a coach. We sort of got people to the point where we could write down a story and
Mhm.
identify it as that. And one of my stories was, I'm the only one who can do it right, so I should do it all. And,
Yeah.
I'm sure
That's
everyone
a
listening is
recipe
like,
for
me too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then like separating what's actually factual here.
Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not a fact. That is a
Mhm.
story. And it's
Yeah.
one that keeps me on a treadmill and
Mhm.
tied in knots and sometimes miserable and often resentful.
Yeah. And you were talking about how you realized that the call was coming from inside the house, right? That you were holding yourself to that standard. Also, I think it's super common in grief, to be told things because it's been internalized by,
Yeah,
I don't know, everyone. Well,
everyone.
just stay busy, right? Just keep
Yes.
busy.
Oh, yes.
As though you can outrun your feelings by staying
Mhm.
busy, or as though it's bad to feel,
Yeah,
right? Perpetuating the time heals myth. But yeah, how many of us are just trying to distract ourselves from what's actually happening when we slow down?
yeah, 100%. And, and once you see it, it still doesn't mean it's not. I find, and I'd be curious to hear about when you coach, how long it takes to make those shifts. But what I found is, interrupting it or recognizing it is a big first step for me to start shifting it, and then I just have to practice and
Mm-hmm.
practice and practice, and, like, can I be with myself and my anxiety about not being at that performance or,
Yeah.
um, not doing this thing that I think I'm supposed to do for my child? Like, what does it feel like to let it come up, and be present? 2 summers ago, after I'd shipped the book to the press or to be printed, the book was done, but I fell off a horse and broke my neck, and I was fine miraculously. Um, but I was in a brace and I was limited. And I couldn't drive and I couldn't lift anything and I couldn't do laundry and I couldn't, all the things. And
Mm-hmm.
it was actually like an advanced practice for me to
Yeah.
have to just sit there for a month and be present with all of my feelings of anxiety that came up that I could not do anything.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard.
What did that bring up for you in terms of the way that you related to your value?
Yeah. I mean, it was one of those things where I felt so bad, right? Like, so badly about myself, badly about what I was, like, quote unquote doing to my partner by making him do more than his typical share. And just honestly being with it and seeing it
Mm-hmm.
was so interesting, and to watch it stoke my anxiety because, of course, one of the stories that I have is, well, my husband's really only married to me because of all the things I do for him, and
Mm.
that's my core value, and if I stop doing all these things for him and making his life so nice, obviously he'll leave me. And again, it gets back to this, like, the way that women are
And the universe
cultured and
is like,
socialized around
and broken neck. Like,
and broken neck.
oh
Yeah, how we're
dear.
just, like, conditioned to, like, look at this relationship as being so, conditional on
Mm.
our service.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting for me. And again, like, just so we're clear, this is all story. This is
Mhm.
not informed by any behavior or any statements by my husband. At no point has he
Yeah.
ever said to me, I'm only going to marry you because you're going to make my life nice.
Sure. But our brain doesn't care about
No,
facts. Those are boring.
no,
Right?
boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about anger. One of the things that I see so often, and I definitely did this in myself, is a judgment of what it means to feel angry and an association with feeling angry, or maybe an extension of feeling angry turns into being angry. Right. And just
Oh,
kind of
like a
like a general,
permanent state.
yeah, like if
Yeah.
I feel angry, that means I'm angry. And people will often start a coaching request with, I'm not an angry person, but
I'm not an angry person, but yeah.
yeah.
Oh, women are full of rage. I mean, it is like it seeps out of us. A few of us are good at actually channeling it. Speaking of the Enneagram, like type 8s, but most of us are full of it, stuff with it. It leaks out or it's repressed. It makes us ill. It comes out in sort of covert and really nasty ways. And again, this is how we're socialized. I mean, I love the anger chapter. It took me a long time to write it because of exactly what you said. I higher mind my anger. I rationalize it. I live in sort of the state of impatience, frustration, irritation. And it took me a long time to get in touch with my actual
Mm-hmm.
rage. And sometimes I visit it, and sometimes there are ways you can sort of like bring it up, like you can stage a fake tantrum. I mean, it's amazing though when you do something like that. Have you staged a fake tantrum where you're like play
Oh, I've
acting?
never done this.
Oh, watch out. You will be like, oh my God, that is like a live wire in me. And all the
Mm-hmm.
tantrums that you probably repressed as a child because you were a good girl are there, ready to like be uncorked. And I think anger is so well, our anger is essential. I mean, it's like that's what moves and shifts the world is well-channeled anger.
Mm-hmm.
And righteous anger, I would say, often. Um, and it can also be incredibly scary, right? And when we go back to relationships, we're terrified that our anger will cost us
Yeah.
relationship. People won't want to be around us. They'll say, "Oh, that angry woman, like, oh no, like change the channel." And that is a cultural response. But for women, it's important for us to recognize, and I write a lot about like the work of Rachel Simmons, who writes about the socialization of girls and developmental psychologists like Carol Gilligan. But Odd Girl Out, which is Rachel Simmons' book, is amazing. And it's and which her point, and I think this is very valid, and this is a sort of one of the meta themes of my book, is that we conflate nature and culture. And so we look at this model of a good woman and we say that's who women are by nature. Anything else is deviant. A good woman, again, prioritizes care, relationship, nurturance, is if I were to go through the sins, a good woman is never tired. A good woman has no wants. She's happy to serve other people's needs. A good woman needs no praise, affirmation, or attention. A good woman has no appetite and is, small and compliant and demure. A good woman doesn't really talk about money, doesn't thinks money is base and gross, and certainly doesn't want more of it. She's happy to give it away. A good woman is desirable and sexy and is a sexual object, but she herself is not desirous. And a good woman is never upset about anything or any of this, right? So Rachel
I just
Simmons' point,
I
sorry,
just
just
feel it in my
feel that.
body like
Yeah,
coming up. Yeah.
really hardcore.
Yeah.
And Rachel Simmons' point is like, that is not who we look at baby boys and baby girls. Is it really just the boys who are crying and the girls
Mm-hmm.
are
Mm-hmm.
compliant and quiet? Um, and then we have to remember, like, the culture is so much bigger than any one of us. You don't have to overtly sign up for any of this for it to be living in you and for you to be modeling it and passing it on. And so, and yes, there are like hormonal differences in young children, et cetera. However, Boys and girls are totally aggressive. They're all aggressive. It's natural and very human. And boys are allowed to channel that. They push and they yell and they shout and they scream. And good girls don't do that. They don't push and they yell. And so that aggression from a very young age becomes covert. And this is why we see alliance building, whisper networks, backstabbing, gossip. It's all that aggression. It has to go somewhere and it needs a target and it comes out sideways. And then we say, well, that's just who girls and women are. They're just these catty bitches. But no, it's because we've been socialized still to not be able to express our anger directly in a confrontation without fear of losing our relationships and being cast out.
Yeah. So what do you say to people when they say things like, I don't want to be angry?
I say, you might not want that, but you're furious, babe. Like, I mean, truly, like I get it. And there are ways to be with our anger and express it that are far more skilled than just sort of like unleashing on the person next to you in the supermarket line, right?
Right.
But to not be with it and to not allow it and to not channel it is another kind of death. Like we can't keep stuffing this into our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, it makes total sense that it's uncomfortable to think about allowing yourself to experience the anger that you feel, because you're probably judging yourself for having it when you think you shouldn't. And nobody probably gave you the skill of how to witness it.
Yeah.
In even tiny little increments, right? So, and of course, then if you saw, people who were supposed to care for you get really angry with their actions and let it fuel how they treated you, it makes so much sense that you would have all of these associations with anger that would prevent you from letting it be felt.
Yeah, we don't have many models. We have very few models, I would say, if any, of women who are effectively angry in any public forum, who are listened to, respected, and not mocked, derided, and called a hysterical shrew. As Harriet Lerner, who wrote The Dance of Anger, points out too, she's like, we have all these words for an angry woman, many which are really nasty. And the two of the primary words for a man, bastard and son of a bitch, still place the blame on the woman.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
True. Never thought about that.
Yeah. It's hardcore. But that's also like, one of the reasons that I wanted to write the book is that so much of this unwinding and finding like a truer, more centered, more honest way to be with ourselves and express ourselves in the world is requires it's collective action and it's group work. It is, and you see this too, I'm sure, in your work, is that when you look at the developmental models, then the masculine is sort of all about growth and individuation, and the feminine is about relationship and integration, both essential. And I think for women to sort of see it, and this would be great for men too, to be fair, but like to practice their growth and individuation in community without losing relationship feels so important and so big, really big.
I agree with you. And I get it too, because also there was a point where I wanted nothing less than to do that work in community, right? Because there's so many, I don't even think there were recognized judgments about it, but but then before we hit record, you had asked me about coaching and do I do one-on-one? And that is the main reason why I don't do one-on-one anymore. It's not because I don't love it. I actually do, but it's because there seems to be so much value in seeing the struggle reflected in another human and knowing that it's not you, in kind of unraveling that what you've been taught, it wasn't just you that was taught that. And maybe Maybe
Yes.
the problem is the lie you were taught as opposed to how you actually feel or how you're experiencing what you're experiencing.
100%. And it's wild. And I'm sure you have this experience all the time. And I have friends who are sort of intuitives or psychic mediums who do group work. And they always talk about how, like, as it will turn out, 3 strangers in the room, like, all had the same experience. You know, like a reading will be one person's dead mother, but it actually could have been like five. It could have applied to 5 of. And just doing this retreat with these 45 women, it was wild as we were working on stories. And I would be talking to one, it would be talking about their story about like how, and it would really come down to like some sort of existential dread. And then like someone across on the other side of the room would be like, mine really comes down to like existential dread, like this mirroring and echoing that was happening. People who had had almost identical experiences that they had taken on as sort of them, their fault. It's really powerful when you realize like, oh, wait, in this culture that insists that everything is highly individualized and all about you and all from your family of origin and all personal, this stuff is collective.
Is
so much
actually
of
collective. Yeah.
Yes.
Totally.
Yeah. Big time.
One of the things I wanted to get your opinion on was related to greed. So I see something in, and I had this experience too, in widows who got money after their husband died or their person died, right? They come into life insurance money, and before that experience would have probably told you that money would help. They would feel better having had it. It would provide some sort of safety or security. And I call it wealth purgatory. That's the best like description I have of it, where the experience they actually have is so surprising to them. It's not comfortable. They don't want people to know that they have it. They don't feel good about how, of course, how they came to get it. They don't, it's just very counter to what they expected that experience would be like. So talk to me about your opinion on that.
That's fascinating and not surprising. I think that, first of all, I think that women are taught we're taught the lie of scarcity, which is that money is sort of finite and boundaried and a pond, whereas men are more inclined, this is Lynn Twist's work, but that men are more inclined to think of it as sort of a boundless river, and a system of energy. They might not call it that, but that like there's always more where it came from. And I think many women are taught to be incredibly tight about it.
We don't make money. We budget.
Exactly. And like that's how we're marketed to, right? Like all the marketing is about it's all the way that women are talked to is totally bizarre. It's like, you better save money. You can't afford that latte. There will never be enough. You'll never have enough. And then also we're admonished to sort of like, we're told that we're the household CEO and that it's our job to hold up the economy. And so and we're also far more generous, too. We're far, far more generous than men. And so there's this like, this conditioning and programming around money that's like, you need to hot potato it away. You can't be trusted with it, and you need to spend it. And you can't be trusted to save it. It's like this crazy whiplash. And then of course, we're also marketed to endlessly with products. And so I think it's a real doozy. I think that there's no wonder that women are so confused about money. And then we're told we can't talk about it. It's gross to talk about money, right? So no one is having a candid conversation about it. Now there are more, primarily in the podcasting space, but and then you think about, we know about the pay gap, which obviously also primarily impacts women of color, married women. If you're a single white woman, I think that typically there isn't much of a pay gap, if a pay gap at all, but you start to see it really show up with all these other Venn diagrams of identity, but the wealth gap is staggering. That's where, and of course it makes sense. Women have been treated as chattel. We couldn't have credit cards until the
Right.
70s. So we're also way behind in terms of accumulating money that would make us feel safe and secure. But as to go to your original question, it's like also really not about the money. Money is never really about the money. It's sort of about what it represents. And I think I think it's a cognitive dissonance if I'm to put myself in the position of these women, besides all the emotions that you mentioned that come with it. Like, I do not like how I got this money. I did not choose this. I do not want this. But also like I didn't earn it. And how could I possibly feel safe and secure when I lost my partner? So everything that this money is supposed to provide is a symbol for something that doesn't exist because like the person I was moored with, anchored with is gone and nothing is certain. So I think we assume it's going to solve some of those like core issues of like, where's my certainty in life? It's gone, right?
Yeah.
Money is powerless in light of that. But we expect it to solve all of our problems, and it can help. It can help, but it's not a substitute.
Yeah, for sure it can solve some problems, but it definitely doesn't create our emotional experience.
No.
But it is so frustrating when you think that you should be having a different experience.
You should be having a different experience.
Yeah.
Yes. No, 100%. And I think for some people, it can be just devastating when I mean, again, it goes to why I wrote the book, thinking like, well, I make a good salary. Like I'm fine. I don't paycheck to paycheck anymore. Like, how am I not relieved? I just have different problems that in some ways are like seem even bigger. This has done nothing except just move the goalpost because it's not about the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
If only we knew that. The way I look at it is, grief is the common experience. Partner loss is the common experience. That is how I meet people, right? And how we meet each other. But so much of the work that we're doing is really not related, right? Like it's this stuff that grief kind of, the loss opens our eyes to as something that is an opportunity to heal something that we didn't maybe know.
Yeah. I just would imagine it being so weird in the context of something like life insurance as like essential. I have it, of course, but then to be like, oh wait, so that was the value of this person, like the loss of this person, to have it quantified like that would probably also be a very disturbing experience, even as you're grateful, but you're like, so that's what that was worth? Like,
right. Yeah. You just resent
the whole thing.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. And then of course that's speaking for the women who actually did get money, and so many don't.
Yeah.
Right. So many didn't have anything like that in place, or thought they did, only to find out that they didn't.
Yeah. And I'm sure if you're working with some younger people too, it's like, I didn't have life insurance until Peter died. I just like hadn't thought of it. Which is crazy. I had I had 2 children at that point, but Peter didn't have life insurance. I mean, you just don't think you're going to die, you know?
Yeah. 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 You talked about, I don't think we've talked about pride yet. In your chapter on pride, illusion self versus true self. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's sort of this idea of who we're supposed to be in the world. And then there's the reality, right, of who we really are. And one of the things that I find with women and pride, there's so much fear wrapped up in this idea of being seen, both as your true self, but I think many of us like create an illusion self to put out into the world because it's much safer, right? We want to protect ourselves. And so we create an image or a separation between the life that we're putting out there and who we really are in order to keep it safe. In reality, I think that's dangerous. I think that you create these vacuums that people can project into, and people are constantly like, there's a discrepancy here between who you are pretending to be and who you really
Yeah.
are. And I think because of the way that we go after women, that makes them incredibly vulnerable, particularly more public ones.
Mhm.
And the hope is, of course, that we can all sort of be our real self, our true self in the world. No illusion required, but the illusion is what we create in order to protect
Mhm.
what's real. Um, and the thing about pride too, which is really about being seen, being affirmed, being praised, and how much we hate that in
Mhm.
women.
Yeah.
How quick we are to cut down the tall poppy in the poppy field or put someone back in their place. Like we see this culturally with famous women all the time.
Mhm.
We like them when they start and we sort of applaud them. And then they get to a certain point of relevance or visibility and they get destroyed, usually for some cockamamie
Mhm.
reason that's reputational about being a bad person. It's never really about an action. It's not like Sean P. Diddy Combs,
Right.
right? It's nothing like that. And then these women are sort of disappeared. And then we buy the merchandise when they do their resurrection comeback tour in 20 or 30 years after they've been like
Mhm.
fully destroyed. Um, and we can say that like that happens to famous women. That's not really us, but it happens in every industry. It
Mhm.
happens in local communities, and it's a playbook for all of us of what happens to women who dare to have a dream for themselves and be seen and to put
Mhm.
themselves out there. And the real problem with that, it's like that only promotes the creation of this illusion self because we recognize how dangerous it is to be
Yeah.
ourselves in the world. And so it's this vicious cycle. And then meanwhile, you have all these people who are like, why would I ever share myself? Why would
Mhm.
I ever even get to understand or know my gifts and then share them with the world when this is what happens? And
Mhm.
like we are at a point in time where we really need those gifts,
Yeah.
particularly from women. Doesn't mean you have to have a big illustrious career or be a titan or even work outside of the house. We're all differently gifted and differently abled, but like it requires a full expression of who you
Mhm.
are.
Yeah. I like the labels for it. I'm not usually big on labels, but I like the idea of thinking about it as true self versus illusion self. And I
Yeah.
also I think I'm a big fan of post-traumatic growth. Like it's something that I'm really fascinated by. And I notice that one of the things that seems to happen when life goes not the way you expected, right, is you kind of tend to look back and do an assessment and go, okay, like,
Yeah.
is this what I wanted to be doing for a living? Like, is this, am I happy with the way that I spend my days? Am I happy with who I'm in relationship with? And am I happy in the quality of those relationships and, other things, spiritual beliefs and all the things. And it can be such a challenge when you recognize that you really aren't happy with the quality of your relationships and you understand that people can't accept you unless you show them who you are.
Yeah.
And also, it's so freaking scary to do it,
It
to
really
let yourself
is.
be that true self and risk rejection. And can you have your own back? Will
Yes.
people have your back?
Yes. Can you stand for yourself?
Yeah.
Um, And I think a lot of us, speaking of illusions, are convinced that we can control the way that other people perceive us or receive us. And so we spend a lot of
Mhm.
energy contorting ourselves and trying to be the person that we think that we're supposed to be, right? It's
Yeah.
very natural. It's the whole point of my book. It's like, how can I be good? How can I be perceived as good? Despite all the bad feelings, the
Mhm.
very humanness, the wholeness of me,
Yeah.
how can I only show people what they want to see?
Right.
And oh, it's such an illusion that you can control despite all your best
Mhm.
efforts. Some
Yeah.
people aren't going to like you. Some people are going to have a lot of feelings about you.
Yeah.
And it's hard, but it's
For sure.
true. And you can either sort of be like, I have to get comfortable with this reality, or you can spend a lot of energy contorting yourself,
Yeah.
all to no real avail, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and you can learn to be with yourself when you are uncomfortable about their discomfort.
Yes. Yes.
Like,
It's a
because
practice.
it
Yeah.
is a practice. It is a practice. And it's, yeah, I don't, sometimes it's easy to like say it on a podcast and make people think that you think it's easy.
No, I do it.
Yeah.
I have to do it I do it all day.
Yeah.
It's required like getting back into my body,
Yeah.
recognizing like, oh, I feel something
Mhm.
right now.
What are some tools that you love, like in terms of practical use? I know you probably can't teach anything long, but like I love tapping. Like what do you
Oh
love?
yeah, tapping is great. I want to learn more about tapping. I do a hold on myself where I cross my hands, I cross my
Mhm.
arms across my chest. I learned this from this woman, Prune Harris, and I go into the lung points right inside of my armpit. You can sort of just feel around until it feels
Mhm.
good. And then you dig your
Feels
fingers
good.
in. Isn't
Mhm.
that good? And I think it's like a bracing technique for me to like remind me
Yeah.
to get me back into my body. But I find it like deeply relaxing,
Mhm.
and lets me get back into sort of my parasympathetic. And I
Mhm.
just hold, and I do it ideally like 30 seconds here and there throughout the day. Or if I'm starting to really feel like I'm getting excited or agitated, I might do it a
Mhm.
little longer. But it's like I call it like plugging into myself,
Mhm.
but it allows me to take a deep breath, and I'm a terrible breather, and really just calm myself down, so that I can feel my feelings.
Yeah. Yeah, and come back to your body.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Just a reminder for listeners, if you want to see her do that, you can go to YouTube.
Oh,
You can,
yeah.
like, watch her actually doing that. Yeah, I love tools like that. What would my teenage years, my young adulthood have been like had
I know.
somebody taught me those tools? I have exciting hope though for like the next generations. I talk to clients and teach them tools like this, and everybody knows I love tapping. And when they tell me that their kids are already doing it or they're teaching their kids, like, oh, yes.
Amazing. I
Yeah.
know. It doesn't feel like it, but it's getting better in some
Mhm.
ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was there anything that you would hope to talk about that we didn't cover?
No, this was amazing. We covered so much ground.
I feel like I mean, yes. And also I still have all these ideas, but I recognize
You
we
know
are
where
at
to find
time.
me.
Yes. Thank you so much. If people want to find you, where should
Yeah.
they go? Yeah.
So the book is On Our Best Behavior, The 7 Deadly Sins and the Price Women Pay to Be Good. My podcast is Pulling the Thread, and I have a Substack that's the same, pullingthethread.substack.com. And I'm on Instagram at Elise Loehnen, ELISELOEHNEN.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story and your wisdom.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
This
I
was a
appreciate it.
delight.
Totally my pleasure. If you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and want to create a future you can truly get excited about even after the loss of your spouse, I invite you to join my Mom Goes On coaching program. It's small group coaching just for widowed moms like you, where I'll help you figure out what's holding you back and give you the tools and support you need so you can move forward with confidence. Please don't settle for a new normal that's less than what you deserve. Go to coachingwithkrista.com and click Work With Me for details and next steps. I can't wait to meet you.